Hey man, there's a hidden pattern you've probably never noticed, but once you do, it changes everything. Most men think communication with a woman is about talking more, explaining more, expressing themselves deeply, or showcasing how emotionally available they are. But that's the trap. That's what makes women feel suffocated, not seen, because you're playing by your rules, not hers. A woman doesn't fall in love with what you say. She becomes obsessed with how you say it, and more importantly, when you don't. The format of your communication is what controls the entire game, not the content. See, most guys get nervous when they like a woman. They want to make sure she feels secure, validated, seen, so they text constantly. They update her every hour. They say good morning and good night, religiously. And what they don't realize is, in her emotional mind, she reads that as desperation, not romance. And women can't become obsessed with something they already fully have. That's the first rule of emotional attraction. Mystery sustains desire. So the man who communicates with scarcity, not abundance, wins her entire emotional system. You want to know why she keeps going back to that one guy who barely gives her the time of day? It's not because he's better looking, richer, or smarter than you. It's because his communication format plays with time, space, uncertainty. He's not trying to be cruel, he's just naturally nonchalant. And that emotional distance, the ambiguity, it activates her need to seek, to wonder, to question. And that emotional state is where obsession is born. Obsession isn't born in comfort, it's born in emotional unavailability disguised as calm leadership. The format that pulls her in isn't the man who constantly replies instantly, it's the man who creates space, lets silence build tension, and speaks only when he means it. That man isn't afraid of being misunderstood temporarily. He knows that long-term emotional pull is not a product of word count, it's a product of presence and mystery. So instead of paragraphs of validation, he uses one sentence. Instead of explaining himself, he lets her imagination fill in the blanks. That man doesn't fear her overthinking. He uses it to become unforgettable. And women will never admit this openly, but they crave this kind of communication. They crave the man whose words feel like rare drops of water in a desert, not because he's cold, but because he's disciplined, because he knows the value of anticipation. When you speak in riddles instead of essays, when your texts feel like clues rather than confessions, when your energy is contained instead of scattered, she starts decoding your words like they're sacred scripture, and every unanswered question becomes emotional fuel. You've got to understand this. Obsession in women doesn't come from comfort, it comes from emotional suspense. When she doesn't know exactly what you're thinking, when she doesn't have full access to your internal world, she starts making up stories, and those stories aren't logical, they're emotional. She wonders why you're quiet, why you're not as talkative today, what's going on in your mind. And those emotional questions trigger her desire to seek answers, which makes her invest emotionally without realizing it. Most men communicate to be understood. High-value men communicate to remain intriguing, and that difference defines whether she just likes you or becomes addicted to you. Because when you create a pattern where your attention is earned, where your words feel earned, she doesn't get bored, she gets locked in. And every time you break the pattern, responding fast, being overly emotional, she resets emotionally. The obsession fades, because she feels like she's already got you, and in her emotional world what she has, she loses interest in. Let's get real. Texting is the battlefield now. Women judge your energy, not by what you say, but by how fast you say it, how eager you sound, how available you seem. And the man who learns to delay without being dismissive, to tease without being crude, to compliment without worshipping, becomes the man who dominates her mind all day. Your tone, your pauses, your delayed replies, they create the frame of a man who has more important things to do. And that to her subconscious screams value. You don't need to be toxic, you don't need to ghost her or play childish games, but you do need to understand that the feminine mind is wired to feel attraction through uncertainty. The man who reveals all at once is emotionally cheap. The man who lets her discover him layer by layer is emotionally rich. And that richness, it creates obsession. She dreams about what else she doesn't know. She rereads your messages, she waits for your replies like it's a test, because you've made your communication a reward, not a routine. Remember this, women speak to connect, Men speak to solve. But in dating, the man who uses silence, ambiguity, brevity, he wins. Because he doesn't speak for validation, he speaks to lead the vibe. And when she senses that your communication isn't about getting her, but guiding her emotionally into curiosity, suspense, and craving, she begins chasing you without knowing why. You become the story she's telling her friends about. You become the puzzle she's trying to solve. And that's how obsession is built. She doesn't want to be spoon-fed affection. She wants to earn it. That's the paradox. She'll tell you she wants consistency and openness, but emotionally, what draws her in is a man who gives in doses, measured, intentional, controlled. The man who isn't quick to text, "I miss you," but instead disappears just enough to make her feel the absence. He becomes unforgettable. Because while words are temporary, emotional states are addictive, and the format of communication that lets her sit in longing, in wonder, in doubt, builds that addiction faster than compliments ever could. And here's the truth about obsession. It's not about being perfect, it's about being hard to pin down emotionally. Women become obsessed with men who don't try to explain everything, who don't spill their entire life story in the first week, who don't respond with, "What's wrong?" every time she's moody. Why? Because those men stay grounded in their own frame. They don't collapse into her emotions, they let her spiral alone, and in that space, she attributes depth to you, mystery to you, masculinity to you. You didn't solve her confusion, you let her experience it, and that feels powerful to her. Think about how many women you've heard say, "There's just something about him, I can't figure him out." That's obsession language. That's what happens when your communication format gives just enough, but never everything. It keeps her emotionally invested. Her mind is working overtime, trying to interpret the subtext of your silences. She starts asking her friends, "Do you think he likes me?" She starts watching your stories and looking for clues. And every time you don't give her clarity, you become more captivating. Because humans chase what they don't fully understand. Women chase men who make them guess. The worst thing you can do is over-communicate. And it's not because communication is bad, it's because the emotional pacing of women is different than yours. She needs room to fantasize, to project, to wonder. When you give her a full emotional meal 3 times a day, she stops being hungry. But when you give her tastes, when your words feel like glimpses behind a curtain, she starts investing more just to see more. That's how the addiction starts. Not with volume, but with depth layered behind restraint. What you say is less important than how and when you say it. The man who knows how to pause before replying. The man who doesn't just respond, but responds in a tone that makes her lean in. The man who lets her texts sit for hours and then answers with a cryptic one-liner that makes her reread it 5 times. That man owns her emotional space because he's not reactive, he's not needy, he's not explaining himself. He's a riddle wrapped in stillness. And to a woman, that's irresistible. Not because she wants confusion, but because her emotions attach to emotional mystery. Women don't obsess over loud men, they obsess over quiet confidence. A man who says less, but whose tone says everything. A man who can hold eye contact for 5 seconds too long, and then walk away without a word. A man whose responses are calm, unbothered, and slightly amused. That's not arrogance, that's emotional command. She feels his presence, not his need. And it creates a deep psychological loop in her mind. Why isn't he trying harder? What does he know that I don't? That loop never ends when your format remains composed. She's drawn in by your absence of emotional overexposure. You know what's common among the men? Women stay obsessed with for years after things end. They were men who didn't talk too much, who never gave full emotional closure, who left things unsaid, left a silence behind that couldn't be filled by the next guy. She can replace your body. She can't replace the feeling you left behind. And that feeling isn't created by saying "I love you" 50 times. It's created by showing up in rare moments with depth, then vanishing with dignity. That contrast burns itself into her memory. It turns you from a person into a phantom. You don't need to be mysterious for the sake of it. You need to be mysterious because you have standards, because you don't give your energy to everyone, because you don't speak just to fill silence. And that difference between presence and performance is everything. When you communicate less, but every word you say lands like thunder, she feels you differently. You don't become the guy she's texting while bored. You become the man who shifts her entire mood with a single voice message. the one who feels like a story, not a status update. Every woman has a natural fantasy loop running in her mind. She's constantly building narratives about the people in her life. So the man who gives her material to fantasize about without ever confirming or denying it becomes larger than life in her imagination. And that's the power of communication. That's deliberate. That's the art of controlled presence. She gets just enough of you to feel something real, but never so much that it becomes predictable. You're not withholding, you're curating, you're choosing to give her emotional space to dream. And that dream becomes you. There's a moment in every woman's journey where she's texting multiple guys, but there's one guy who replies the least and still consumes her thoughts the most. That man isn't playing games. He's just not seduced by her beauty. He speaks when he wants. He doesn't rush, he doesn't chase, and because of that, she chases him harder. She feels a strange frustration. Why can't I get to him like I do with the others? And that emotional itch turns into obsession, because what she can't control becomes what she needs to possess. You don't win a woman's obsession by overwhelming her with attention. You win it by making your attention rare. Scarcity breeds value. If she knows you'll always reply instantly, always pour your emotions out at the drop of a hat, always be available to validate her, she subconsciously ranks you lower, not because you're not good enough, but because she doesn't feel the weight of your presence. The man who makes her wonder, the man who makes her pause before texting, the man who can sit in silence without anxiety, he becomes the center of her emotional universe. He doesn't just communicate, he communicates like a man who knows his worth. And here's what she won't tell you. When a man stops over-explaining, stops oversharing, and just exists with calm dominance, she starts scripting her own narrative. She rewrites every glance, every emoji, every delay in response into meaning. He must be busy. He must be talking to someone else. He must be hard to impress. Suddenly, you're not just a guy, you're an emotional puzzle. And the female mind loves puzzles. She bonds through solving them. She bonds through the chase, the fantasy, the tension. The more you let her guess, the deeper she gets pulled into that emotional storm. And the deeper she falls, the less she even wants certainty. This doesn't mean becoming cold or manipulative. It means becoming intentional. Communicating in a way that aligns with masculine energy. Few words, deep meaning, calm energy, not reactive noise. Subtle confidence, not forced bravado. When your words are backed by purpose, not pressure, you tap into a part of her that craves emotional polarity. She needs the storm. You bring the stillness. And together, the contrast creates intensity. An intensity that sticks in her nervous system like a drug. She'll never say it out loud, but your restraint, that's the very thing that makes her feel drawn to you beyond logic. She may get attention from dozens of men. She may be flattered by sweet talkers and chased by charmers, but the man she obsesses over, he's the one whose attention is unpredictable. The one whose texts feel like discoveries. The one whose silences feel like mysteries waiting to be unraveled. The man who speaks not to impress, but to express, on his terms. That man becomes unforgettable. Because in a world full of men shouting for her time, the man who whispers with presence and walks away with calm owns her mind without lifting a finger. Not because of what he says, but because of how he says it and when. So if you want to be the man women obsess over, stop focusing on saying the right things. Start communicating with energy that tells her, I don't need to win you. I'm already complete. Let your presence speak louder than your paragraphs. Let your calm speak louder than your compliments. Be slow to speak, quick to observe. Make her feel your depth, not by revealing everything, but by revealing very little, very deliberately. That's the format, that's the frame. That's the energy that makes women spiral in longing. And once they fall into that emotional gravity, they never forget who pulled them in without ever lifting a word. That's how obsession begins, with silence wrapped in certainty.